Welcome to Hamburgers and Hot Rods, the podcast featuring Southern California's classic car community and its food scene. Let's get started now. Hello everyone, I'm Jim Karras. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Hamburgers and Hot Rods podcast. The title of today's show is Cruisin' the Boulevard. In our show today, we are going to cruise down memory lane and discuss the resurgence of street cruising in the 1970s. While this pastime began to emerge shortly after many young Americans had access to used cars in the late 1940s, the popularity of cruising in cars among teen drivers hit a peak in the late 1970s after the box office hit American Graffiti was released in theaters nationwide in 1973. We will talk about the film and its depiction of teen culture in Modesto, California in 1962. We will share some of the popular cruising locations around the Southland over the years, and to discuss what the cruising scene was like in Whittier on Whittier Blvd in the late 1970s, we will welcome our first guest on the show, Steve Sharp of Alvin, Texas, which is located just south of Houston, Texas. As a teenager, Steve lived in East Whittier in the 1970s and spent many evenings on its main thoroughfare, Whittier Boulevard, with his high school buddies and other friends cruising the boulevard. In 1973, American Graffiti, a film produced by Francis Ford Coppola and directed by George Lucas, was released in American theaters across the country. The film encapsulated cruising in the late 1950s and early 60s in a way that no other representation has been able to reproduce. Set in Modesto, California in the summer of 1962, American Graffiti captured a group of teens as they take their last hurrah before adulthood. The film was the launching pad for several stars at the onset of their careers, including Richard Dreyfuss, Ron Howard, Cindy Williams, Suzanne Summers, and Harrison Ford, and was director George Lucas's first big hit before the Star Wars franchise. Throughout the course of the movie, the characters cruise up and down McHenry Avenue, the main drag of Modesto, and all throughout the city over the course of one night. The soundtrack features classic tunes like Rock Around the Clock and Surf and Safari. They hit all the spots where it was hip to be seen, including, most famously, Mel's Diner. Well-known DJ Wolfman Jack provided a great backdrop to the film's soundtrack as the kids each listened to his radio show on their car radios in many of the scenes throughout the movie. The movie showcases the cars that were available to teens at the time, older used cars, souped-up hot rods, and on a rare occasion, a newer car like the 1958 Chevrolet Impala that was featured in the film. Also depicted in the film was the popularity of drag racing and street culture with highly modified cars that were prized for their ability to go fast at the drop of a hat. It also shows the dangers of racing with the crash and explosion of the black 1955 Chevy 150. The film wraps with the main characters heading into adulthood. The movie had a legacy and inspired a whole new generation to embrace cruising in the 1970s. It was a way to cling to youth and vitality and the opportunity to live in the moment with your friends and your cars. The other stars of the film were the cars featured throughout. Given the popularity of the film's cars with customizers and hot rodders in the years since its release, their fate immediately after the film is ironic. All were offered for sale in San Francisco newspaper ads. Only the 1958 Impala, driven by Ron Howard in the film, attracted a buyer, selling for only a few $100s. The Yellow Deuce and the White T-Bird went unsold, despite being priced as low as $3,000. In Southern California, popular cruising locations over the years included Whittier Blvd in East Los Angeles, Montebello, Whittier, and La Habra. Whittier Blvd in East Los Angeles is widely known as a popular cruising spot for the lowrider community and has been so for decades. Whittier Blvd has a long-standing car culture that began when the Ford Motor Company established their first Los Angeles plant nearby at 7th Street and Santa Fe Avenue in 1912. By the late 1940s, Pachucos and Zoot Suiters were paving the way for modern cruise culture in Boyle Heights. In the late 1950s, the Los Angeles riverbed beneath the 6th Street Bridge became a popular meeting spot for drag racing. The famous grease scene takes place there. Young enthusiasts spent time and money fixing up their cars to show off and race. Perhaps the most popular car mod to this day, the lowrider, would eventually grow to become a symbol of Latino culture itself. The party never really stopped, and as late as 2017, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors passed a motion to review enforcement of non-permitted cruising events on Whittier Boulevard in unincorporated areas such as East Los Angeles. Today, Los Angeles area car clubs organize permitted cruising events on Whittier Boulevard in East Los Angeles on occasion to celebrate the famous thoroughfare and its contributions to the lowrider cruising culture, not only in Southern California, but across the nation. Ventura Boulevard in Sherman Oaks and Van Nuys, at the further edges of Los Angeles, with the rise of rock and roll and disposable income amongst teens, helped spur cruising culture in the San Fernando Valley along Van Nuys Boulevard from the 1950s into the 1970s. Los Angeles native and photographer Rick McCloskey recounted in his recently released book, Los Angeles in the 1970s. Cruise night was every Wednesday on Van Nuys Boulevard from the early 1950s through the 1970s. Gasoline was mighty cheap. New and old cars were surprisingly inexpensive as well. The San Fernando Valley was home to what seemed like at the time 1 million teenagers, and just about all of them spent many a wonderful evening endlessly cruising from one end of Van Nuys Boulevard to the other, and then back again. Popular stops along the way were Bob's Big Boy, June Ellen's Donuts, A&W Root Beer, as well as many lesser-known spots. The Boulevard was where you went to see and be seen, and to meet new friends, show off your ride, grab a milkshake or a double burger, and just have an all-around great time. In Hollywood, the glitz and glamour of a possible star sighting on Hollywood Boulevard provided some of the allure for cruising Hollywood Boulevard in the 1950s and 60s. One can't miss the towering Capitol Records building in the skyline. Nearby, LA's growing counterculture made Sunset Boulevard, and more specifically the Sunset Strip, its home base as rock and roll clubs like the Whiskey A Go-Go and Pandora's Box opened up. In South Los Angeles, Crenshaw Boulevard had its own cruising culture. Crenshaw Boulevard cruising culture began in the 1960s due in part to its celebrated nightlife featuring the era's musical luminaries. Acts from Nat King Cole, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye to Parliament, and the Gap Band were known to perform at the legendary Memory Lane Supper Club and Mavericks Flats, which was dubbed the Apollo of the West. During the 1980s and 90s, the emerging rap scene was inseparable from car culture, as immortalized on screen in Spike Lee's Boys in the Hood. In the San Gabriel Valley, Colorado Boulevard and Pasadena, on the other end of Los Angeles, included not only Rose Parade floats, but vehicles cruising down Colorado Boulevard could be seen on most every Friday and Saturday night. Drive-ins, rock and roll, and muscle cars define this stretch, which even gets a shout-out in the Beach Boys song, The Little Old Lady from Pasadena. As recorded at the Pasadena History Museum, Dory Pendergrass describes a typical night out on Colorado Boulevard in 1956. Cruising Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena at night became a favorite thing to do with my girlfriends. I was the only one in my clique who had a car. Sometimes we stopped at the new restaurant McDonald's. It sported golden arches and had a sign at the curb that gave a daily count of burgers sold. More often, though, we chose the drive-in restaurant. A ponytailed car hop wearing a perky outfit and roller skates took our order. We listened to our favorite music from the restaurant speakers such as Bo Diddley, Hand Clappin', and Mary Lou. There was also a new singer, Elvis Presley. His just-released songs were Love Me Tender, Don't Be Cruel, and Hound Dog. We ate, gossiped, giggled, and sang. In Orange County, down on South Main Street and Bristol Avenue was where the action could be found in Santa Ana. Santa Ana has seen cruising from the early 1950s into the late 1990s, and even sometimes today. In the 50s and 60s, South Main Street was the place to be in Santa Ana. Some folks even took the drive clear out to Newport Beach to hang out at the Mel's Diner, built on Pacific Coast Highway and MacArthur Boulevard in 1949. In the late 1990s, the Orange County edition of the Los Angeles Times reported that the Santa Ana City Council needed to enforce its anti-cruising ordinance passed in 1989 due to increased problems along South Bristol Street. At the time, the Sunday night cruising ritual drew up to 8,000 drivers from all over the Southland to cruise an 8-block stretch along South Bristol Street. In 2015, a group of lowrider car clubs abandoned cruising South Bristol and instead moved their annual Easter gathering to Mile Square Park in nearby Fountain Valley. This was to avoid being fined by officers of the Santa Ana Police Department for traffic-related violations. But today, some lowrider car clubs still organize smaller cruising events a couple times a year along South Bristol Street in Santa Ana for nostalgia's sake. In the Inland Empire, E Street in San Bernardino was the popular cruising spot. According to an article in the San Bernardino Sun, the city of San Bernardino was the car cruising capital of Southern California from the late 1940s into the early 1970s. Memories of cruising E Street in 1955, stopping at Carnation Ice Cream and grabbing 50-cent burgers at McDonald's are etched into the city's collective memory. Cruising is an important chapter in San Bernardino's history by many inland area residents. By the early 70s, car clubs were huge in the Inland Empire, and the Over the Hill Gang, which has its roots at San Gorgonio High School, developed the car club culture. Cruisers in their heyday would stop at Arrows and Bogart's, a popular E Street nightclub, and the former Orange Bowling Alley with its nice wooden dance floor. San Bernardino was a happening place, attracting popular and up-and-coming bands at its venues. The first time Van Halen played in front of an audience was at Arrows and Bogart's. He introduced the band as a garage band out of Pasadena. Things started changing in the 80s. E Street started to decline. So did cruising. The former nightclub is now a thrift store on E Street between 9th and 10th. Car shows became popular, but the car culture hit a new low when E Street died. Enter Route 66 and the revitalization of the city with souped-up classic cars. When the city's classic car culture intersected with San Bernardino's stretch of Route 66, along 5th Street in San Bernardino, a national car culture rose up from the asphalt of the Mother Road. Route 66, the legendary strip of highway running between Santa Monica and Chicago, dubbed the Mother Road by John Steinbeck in his 1939 novel, The Grapes of Wrath, has connected a cultural cross-section of Americans since it was paved in 1937. Cruisers were back on the road again. Between 1991 and 2013, San Bernardino hosted the Stater Brothers Route 66 Rendezvous, the California's ode to the Mother Road, in the city's downtown streets. Roadies and car buffs could tell the stories and relive the memories of traveling in vintage vehicles across California's vast yawning desert. The huge automotive street fair, which celebrated Cruisin, classic cars, and hot rods, attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors each year to the 3-day event. In the 1970s, I was a teenager living in Rowland Heights, California, on the other side of the pointy hills of Whittier, California. I went to Rowland High School in Rowland Heights and graduated in 1979. I received my driver's license when I became 16 years old in October of 1977. Many of my friends during high school regularly drove their cars over the hill to cruise Whittier Blvd in Whittier during those times. Once I was able to drive, I followed suit and hit the boulevard almost every Friday and Saturday night. To help tell this story, I've invited an old friend to join in to share our experiences in cruising Whittier Boulevard during these fun times growing up in Southern California. Let's bring Steve Sharp into our conversation to share his memories of Whittier and the cruising scene there in the 1970s. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you join us today. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Jim. Yeah, I'm really excited to share what I remember, and I'm thankful that you're capturing this piece of history for others to learn about and hear about.
Yeah, let me take a moment to introduce you to the audience, and then let's get into it. Steve Sharp lived in East Whittier in the 1970s and attended Lucerna High School, one of 4 Whittier area high schools in the Whittier Union High School District. Steve graduated from Lucerna in 1977. I first met Steve around the fall of 1977 after a good buddy of mine who was a neighbor of ours in Rowland Heights, California, moved with his family over the hill to Whittier earlier in 1976. He just lived down the street from Steve and his family's house. So again, welcome. Let's get into it, shall we?
I'm ready. I think I am.
Okay, so let's start with, when did you get your driver's license?
So I got it as soon as I could. I had gotten my learner's permit as soon as I could. Back then you could take driver's ed in high school, unlike today. And so I had my learner's permit as soon as I could get it, and I got my driver's license as soon as I could get it also. I could not wait to drive, even though my dad had taught me how to drive many years earlier. I wanted to be able to drive legally, and jumped on it as soon as I can.
Oh my gosh! So that would have been what, about 75?
76, I guess.
Yep. Wow. And I remember when I first met you, you had I think it was a 1957 Chevy. I believe it was a Bel Air.
I had a 57 Chevy. I actually had a few of them, but the one that you'll remember was actually a 210 model. That was one of my earliest cars. It was the car that I cherished the most, and essentially built the drivetrain myself. Starting, I knew what I wanted, and I couldn't afford what I wanted. So, as a young teenager, I started collecting parts to build what I wanted, because I couldn't buy what I wanted. I'd have to do it piecemeal, one paycheck at a time type of thing.
Yeah, I remember those days. I was in the same boat. I think we all were. But what did you end up putting into it? What was your powertrain?
That 57 Chevy had a 350 Chevy small block, and it was bored out 30 over, so it was a 355, and I had about 12.5 to 1 compression in it, and a good. I had an ISKI cam in it, and it made good power, and the whole drivetrain was thought out well, and so from the fan blade to the rear end, it all went well together. But it was a small block Chevy with a Muncie M22 rock crusher 4-speed and a 411 Posi 12-bolt.
I had the similar train that our buddy Rich, his grandfather in the Nova. I don't know if you recall it. It was very similar to the M22 and the 411s, but it was made it to the 283. So it wasn't anywhere near as quick as yours, but it was still plenty of power for me, being 16 at the time. It was a lot of fun to drive, but your car was really fast.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the faster street cars in the Whittier area. I don't recall ever losing in that car, but there were faster cars, but I knew not to challenge them. It was a high 11, low 12 street car.
That was incredible.
And there were some, cruising the Boulevard and whatnot. There were some guys that brought some really fast cars out there, and I knew my limitations. So I avoided the 9-second V8 Vegas and the low 10-second Chevy Novas and big blocks in a Chevette type cars.
Yes. There was some crazy stuff out there, and then the mini trucks later on.
Oh yeah, the mini trucks were cool, and I ran with one of my best friends had a mini truck, and he was into the mini truck culture. But those were not fast cars by any means. They were just cool vehicles.
How about, I forget the gentleman's name. He lived just on the other side of Rich's house. He had the Volkswagen. He was into the bugs.
Greg Davis was his name.
Yeah, Greg, that's right. Tell us a little bit about his car.
So I don't know exactly what year the bug was, but it was impressive. It had a 2180 in it, and he would that's what really drew me to Volkswagens was how quick that car was. He could do a wheelie without breaking the speed limit. He would just launch that thing in the street, and he would lift the wheels in first and second gear before he'd even hit the speed limit. They just launched. But they were high maintenance. I remember him tearing down the motor every weekend to go out and street race. I think it ran 1320s. It was a pretty quick bug.
That's what I recall was 13s, and it seems to me he had a second motor on the stand.
Oh yeah, he did not like to spend much downtime, so he would have motors in the background that he would work on, and then he could change a Volkswagen engine in half an hour and be back on the road.
Incredible. So how about you? Do you recall your early times of first hitting the Boulevard and kind of what the scene was like back in those days? That was a couple years before I actually hit the Boulevard, so you had a head start.
Oh yeah, I think my earliest memories were probably in the back seat of my dad's car. 12, 13 years old. We didn't really cruise the Boulevard as a family, but my dad liked Bob's Big Boys, and so we would go to Bob's and either go inside or use the car hop service or park in the parking lot and look at the cars that were going by cruising. That's probably my earliest memories of cruising. Even though I wasn't cruising, I was experiencing the cruise culture. And, then as I got a little older, 15 years old or so, 14, 15, I was able to ride with friends who had, they were a year or two older, and they would cruise the Boulevard, and I would get to ride with them. So, cruising on the Boulevard had started years before I was actually able to cruise myself.
Oh wow! I didn't realize that that you actually got to experience the car hop service. By the time I hit the Boulevard, they had stopped, doing the car hop service. That's really cool.
Yeah, that was as a kid with my dad, of course, was heavy into the hot rods and hamburgers culture his whole life too, and so I got to experience it as a kid because of him.
My experience with car hop service also with the family at A&W. There was a couple of A&Ws up in the San Gabriel Valley that our family went to. I've never been to a Bob's car hop, but I was aware that they had it. I have driven by that location on Whittier Boulevard when they offered it. We just never actually stopped there. So by the time I got there on my own driving, it had migrated over to Scotty's. If I don't know if you recall Scotty's, that's kind of the hangout when I first started hitting the Boulevard.
Okay, well, yeah, Bob's was on the north side of the Boulevard, and Scotty's was on the south side of the Boulevard, not directly across the street from each other, but Scotty's was, I'm going to call it the epicenter or ground zero for street racers, and which I became. And so I spent most of my time hanging out in and around Scotty's as opposed to Bob's. Once I could drive myself, Scotty's was my go-to place.
That's really cool. How about Noggles? Did you ever leave the Boulevard? I know a bunch of us in the area there, would frequent Noggles, but I recall leaving the Boulevard and heading down to Noggles. I don't know, did you do that as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, once the cruising died down, whether it was 1, 2 a.m., once the evening was over and we've got our races in and whatnot and cruising done and we wanted something to eat, yeah, Noggles was kind of a go-to place. So we went there often, loved their burritos. When I was a senior in high school, I had a girlfriend who worked at Noggles, and so I was a regular Noggles customer, definitely.
Later on in a future show, I actually had become friends with the gentleman that is rebooting Noggles. They just opened up a full-service restaurant in Stanton on Beach Boulevard, and they actually now are offering drive-thru service. It's a complete restaurant, and so hopefully I'm going to see if he will come on the show. We're going to feature Noggles and their history in a future show, but I have fond memories of the La Mirada Noggles as well, and it was definitely, in my mind, intertwined with the whole cruising scene in Whittier. It's so interesting how, whatever that is, a mile or two away, it's still...
Yeah, definitely, because, once the Boulevard shut down, after midnight, you couldn't get anything to eat. And we would sometimes be so busy, with all the Boulevard action and racing and whatnot that we didn't have time to eat. So we would often end up at Noggles, late at night, 1, 2 in the morning.
How about your actual cruise time on the Boulevard? Where did you cruise? What section of the Boulevard did you cruise? Where were your turning points? Tell us a little bit about your rounds on the Boulevard.
Well, definitely the majority of the cruising took place in a 2-mile stretch from Colima to Painter. And the turnaround points could be anywhere, where you could actually turn around because, during its heyday, it was stop and go, bumper to bumper in both lanes for 2 miles. And so, it might take an hour, or as much as 2 hours just to go 2 miles. And turning around was a big deal. But essentially, if there was a little side street you could turn around on and get back going, that'd be great. But otherwise, you would essentially turn around near Colima and Painter. Sometimes you would go a little further west on Painter than Painter, down as far as like Santa Fe Springs Road, the next major big intersection.
Right.
But it was only because that's how far you had to go to turn around. Not because, people were hanging out on the sidewalks there. In the concentrated area, like around Whittier Blvd and Calmada, right in that area where Bob's was and Scotty's was, it was very difficult to turn around. So you would end up going, all the way to Colima sometimes or to Painter to be able to turn around and go back.
I can recall later on, a few years afterwards, probably 77, 78, Whittier police, they really stepped up enforcement. And so we would have to either go down to Scott or even as far down as Santa Gertrudis to turn around because it definitely was, that was towards the tail end of it.
Yes, they started putting those barricades, those big white, like sawhorse barricades across the side streets so that you couldn't, turn around. They would force you to go past, where you wanted to go. They were trying to keep cars out of the neighborhoods, I understand, but, there were so many people along the boulevard that all the parking lots were full sometimes, and there was nowhere to park. If you wanted to cruise, that's fine, but some of especially the street racers, they didn't cruise up and down, back and forth all night long. They would make a couple of passes looking for something, and then they would park. Some of these cars had issues with overheating, and you couldn't just run up and down the boulevard, an hour or two cruising. You'd have to park your car to keep it from overheating and look for a race.
I remember, I had problems with that in the Nova. It would load up, and so I remember the parking lot, I believe it was a Ralph's there at Colima. That was a popular spot to hang, and I parked there a few times.
Yes, and it was a great place to park and watch. Because you could see most of the people coming by and trying to turn around.
Yes, and that was the problem with Scotty's. Scotty's was good, but it was so congested unless you actually walked out onto the boulevard. Of course, there was enough going on in that parking lot alone to keep your interest for sure. But, I did like some of the other parking lots. There was the other, I believe it also was a Ralph's on the other side down towards Painter. I forget the cross street, but that was a little different scene, actually. I don't know that those were so much racers as they were some of the other kids out there.
No. There were, you had different pockets or concentrations of the different car types. The street racers, Scotty's was definitely headquarters. And then, Bob's to me was more of the, like street rods. Older guys with, nice street rods and people with, nice cars, but they weren't into the racing scene. The racing scene was definitely centered around Scotty's.
In doing some of the research online for the show, I came across some interesting threads, a couple different forums, and the guys were reminiscing about Stick City and Street Rods and some of the shops and dealers that were there at the time. Do you recall any of those businesses?
Oh yeah. Well, Stick City was further down the boulevard. It was almost to Beach Boulevard. It was on the right-hand side or south side of Whittier Boulevard, almost to Beach Boulevard. Yeah, that was a great place to go and hang out and look at the cool cars they had for sale that I couldn't afford. And then there was also Street Rods, which was closer to the cruising area. Stick City was outside the cruising area boundaries pretty much because it was a couple miles past Colima.
Right.
But we would go to Stick City often and fall in love with something we'd want that we couldn't afford. But it was a great place to go and hang out. And the guys were cool there. They would let us look at the cars, and, we'd get some ideas there. Stick City was definitely legendary in the area, more so than Street Rods. But Street Rods was a little closer to the action. It was a fun place to go and look also.
What years did you cruise Whittier? Do you remember about the time frame?
Oh, yeah. I guess I probably started cruising, really cruising around 75 with friends.
That sounds right. Yep.
I was fortunate to have a couple of friends that were a year or two older than me that had a vehicle. And, even though they didn't have street race cars, it was just fun to cruise up and down the Boulevard and, hoot and holler at the girls and look at the cool cars. And, to me, it was the closest thing that we could get to American Graffiti.
Right.
Very much like the scenes in American Graffiti, where it's bumper to bumper, 4 lanes of traffic, going 1 mile an hour, hooting and hollering at everybody and just having fun. I didn't have my own car yet, I was just having fun.
And then, what cars did you cruise the Boulevard on? I know you took the 57. Did you ever take the 442 down there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had the 57, which was definitely my fastest car and most fun to cruise in, because it was also somewhat of a sleeper, and I definitely raced it the most and had the most fun in it. But I also had a 66 Chevelle.
Oh, I forgot about the Chevelle. Yes.
It had a 427 Muncie 4-speed and 411 rear, so it was pretty respectable. It was not as fast as the 57, but I had an awful lot of fun in it too.
Oh, they're a nice car. I'd love to have one now.
And I had the 70 Olds 442 also, and it was really fun because they weren't real popular and people didn't know really what it was. They thought it was a Cutlass maybe. They didn't know the power that it had. But it was a low 13-second car in street trim. Won many races with it also, and it was great for cruising because it had all the creature comforts as well as the power.
Oh, the beautiful car, just a beautiful car. Really, like you said, it was probably the most comfortable. I'm sure the girls really liked riding in that one because they had air conditioning.
Oh yeah, air conditioning. Yeah, it had all the creature comfort, and it was an automatic. It was a Turbo 400, so it was a little easier to drive, and it was not a race car, but it was certainly it was respectable and could beat a lot of the cars out there. It was a lot of fun, even at 7 miles a gallon.
Well, the Nova was like a 15-second car, but compare the two, the Nova looked, it was kind of a sleeper too, but it still looked like it was designed for street racing, and yet here's this essentially stock car, large body, full-size car that would just run circles around, most everything Chevy was putting out at the time. It really was an amazing vehicle. The 442, all across all years, is really something that GM, I think, did so well.
Yeah,
I've always been a fan.
The longer I've owned it, the more I've fallen in love with it.
I don't know if you ever saw this car, but my dad had a 64 98 Sport Coupe. And it was very similar to our 64 Impala. It's kind of eerie. When I first got into the Impala, I was like, it took me back to my dad's 98 Sport Coupe. Same bucket seats, same feel. That car had, the body that went for miles. It was a long car.
Yeah.
But it was quick. It was really a fast car and very sporty for an Olds. Predating the 442s. And it was a neat car. But so that car gave me an appreciation for Oldsmobiles that, prior to him having that car, I never had. He always told me that he liked Oldsmobiles. And what his take on Oldsmobile was that it was the predecessor for testing for Cadillac. That GM, it was an up series car, but they often, when they were getting ready to make a major change for a Cadillac, Cadillac car, they would test it in the Oldsmobiles. And so, he thought it was the best value out of their lineup because he was a fan of them. So I never owned an Oldsmobile, but I've always liked them.
I've loved that car since day one. Still have it.
And then, did you ever cruise any other streets growing up other than Whittier Blvd? Did you ever cruise up to L.A. or out to the San Fernando Valley, any of the other popular spots of the day?
I went to Van Nuys Boulevard a couple of times, just because it was so famous. Had to see it, but it was very similar to Whittier Blvd, but it was a long drive, especially for a teenager in a street racing car. But it was I'm glad I went, but it was the people were different, I think, because they were valley people, and
right.
I enjoyed going up there and seeing it was a different kind of car up there, but they certainly had a lot of fast cars up there as well. And I enjoyed going to Van Nuys Boulevard also. Another we cruised out was Beach Boulevard.
Oh, you did cruise Beach. I did that a couple times. Yeah.
It was, Beach was, especially, from Whittier Boulevard south, it was wide open. And if you ran across somebody, you could open it up and even race directly on Beach Boulevard, where you couldn't do that on Whittier Boulevard. It was just too crowded. You could maybe launch on Beach Boulevard and maybe get up to second gear on Beach Boulevard, but then you'd have to shut it down, either because of the police or the crowds. But on Beach Boulevard, you could actually find a race and actually race directly on Beach Boulevard. And you could cruise Beach Boulevard essentially from Whittier Boulevard down to PCH. There was always somebody running up and down through one of those cities. Beach Boulevard was not as concentrated as it was as Whittier Boulevard, but it was certainly a great place to cruise and a lot of fun on there also. And then PCH also, we used to cruise PCH.
What area of PCH did you cruise? I never really did cruise PCH.
Mostly, in the Huntington and Newport area.
Well, that's yeah.
Typically we'd go, down Beach Boulevard to PCH, and most of the time we'd turn right and go up PCH, up the coast that way through Huntington Beach, and very little racing action, but it was still a great place to cruise, even at night. Daytime, nighttime, PCH was always a great place to cruise.
And to set the scene, back in those days, there were quite a few oil derricks still up.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't heavily populated unless you got near the pier or something. So it was pretty wide open, and you could gas it, you could get on it and find somebody to race pretty safely.
So how about we kind of touched on it, how about the social interactions back up on Whittier Boulevard? Scotty's was one of your favorites, so mostly I guess the talk was about everybody's running gear and all the last race they've been on. What else do you recall about the social interactions?
Well, that was something that we didn't think about at the time, but, now that I think about it, it was a huge part of the foundation and building blocks for my social interaction. I wish there were some pictures of it. It's probably other than school, it was probably an experience you can't get anywhere else. The information and emotions that we exchanged with people over their cars, with your friends, with, the search for girls, looking for good food, learning about money. We learned a lot and gained a lot of experience just interacting with people. Another one of the things that it really taught us about was competition. And obviously there was people competing with their cars, for one, but, whether it was for looks or speed or sound or something, that was a big part of the social interaction as well. People were also competing for others' attention, trying to get dates, trying to pick up, dates. And there was also guys out there trying to prove how tough they were and their dominance. Some were out there just mainly looking for a fight. So you learned a lot about the world just by hanging out and cruising.
That's
and
so
we
true.
also learned a lot about cooperation. You know, friends helping friends with their cars, you know, either whether it was working on them or loaning them apart, you know, so they could get up there and cruise and race. But also, you know, I saw a lot of strangers helping strangers with their cars.
Well, when someone would have trouble, that's right.
Yeah, whether it was, you know, they're broke and they need a tool or a part, you know, or, you know, someone's got to go to an auto parts store and get them something, you know, actually physically helping them get their car running, or whether it was just, you know, an intellectual exchange where, you know, what is that? What are you running? You know, why do you have that gear? Just cooperating with total strangers. We learned a lot about that as well.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny. As you know, I've been involved in the car club scene and the car show scene here, and a lot of the interactions at the car shows remind me of what it was like on Whittier Blvd. It's the same guys. They're all older now and they have more money, and they're, you know, buying the things they couldn't then. But that same culture still exists today amongst those same folks. It really is interesting to see. I think you absolutely described it perfectly. For me, it was a whole new world. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was very exciting. You know, I would drive over from Rolling Heights almost every Friday and Saturday night. That's the draw was so neat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was magnetic.
Yep.
And people came from really far and wide. You know, they came from San Fernando Valley. They came from the South Bay. They came from Orange County. They came from San Gabriel Valley, because it was really that big. And so you got to, you know, meet and interact with all kinds of different people. And it was really a great big street party with a lot of cool people. And it didn't matter whether, you know, you were Hispanic, black, white, Asian. You know, it was centered around cruising and cars, and people got along great.
Yeah, I know. I heard the stories in other areas where they had trouble, but I don't recall. You know, I recall skirmishes on the Boulevard and people, you know, but really I don't recall the violence that I know did occur in those times in other areas. And I guess we were just fortunate. Just about anybody you could approach and start a conversation with. It was really neat.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, Whittier Boulevard, there were really two separate cruising areas. You had the street rods and street racers and whatnot in East Whittier, in the Painter, Colima area. But then in further up the boulevard towards East LA was another huge cruising area. Maybe just as big, but it was lowriders. You know, these were hydraulics on Impalas, lowriders, and it was just as packed. I think that's where, you know, some of the stories like you mentioned occurred more so than East Whittier, although there was certainly plenty of fights in East Whittier, but a lot of it had to do with people trying to prove their dominance and be macho, and they're just out there to fight.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I couldn't have asked for a better interview as our first interview on the podcast. It's great to talk to you, but your recollections are just spot on, and it's been a lot of fun reminiscing with you. Do you have any last stories or thoughts you want to share?
I could probably go all day on this, but because this is something I know rather well, near and dear to my heart. But, you know, the Boulevard was actually so crowded most of the time that you couldn't race on the Boulevard. You might be able to launch, you might be able to do a burnout, you might be able to get up to second gear, but you couldn't really race. It was just too crowded, and, you know, and the police presence. So, you know, Scotty's, being the epicenter of street racing, is where you would essentially negotiate and find somebody to race. And then we would head for Santa Fe Springs Road, or another road. It was called Dice Road, but it was known as the Box Factory because there was a big box factory in there. But that's where most of the street racers would go to actually race, because it was away from everybody, in an industrial area, and there was no side streets you had to worry about. You know, it was actually pretty safe in terms of other people and police. And so, you know, there was Scotty's was certainly the headquarters for street racing, but the street racing actually took place, a couple miles away down on like Santa Fe Springs Road and the Box Road and Shoemaker and some of those other streets.
Shoemaker, I remember Shoemaker. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah. In Roland Heights, there was a couple places we would meet. In the earlier years, it was by a Wiener Schnitzel, and after that, it was down over by Tommy's. And Arendt was a street that was popular in that area. So we negotiate and then go down there to Arendt. And yeah, that was those were fun days for sure.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope to have you on again. We'll cover some other topics, and if I think of anything that you might be interested in joining in, you always have an open invitation.
Oh, well, thank you, and I really appreciate what you're doing to capture this piece of history.
Thank you so much. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
Sure. Bye-bye.
I want to thank Steve Sharp for coming on the show. I hope that our discussion of cruising on Whittier Blvd and the brief history of cruising in Southern California provides a glimpse into what this pastime entailed over the last 30 years. It was sure a fun part of my teenage years growing up, and I was really excited to be able to rekindle some of those memories talking it through with you and Steve today. I hope each of you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now it's time for Sabrina with the upcoming car events around Southern California, courtesy of SoCalCarCulture.com.
Here's what's happening in the car hobby around Southern California for the weekend of March 6th through March 8th. Friday, March 6th, Buena Park has Classic Car Fridays at the Elks Lodge at 7212 Melrose Street from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Burbank has Bob's Big Boy at 4211 West Riverside Drive from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. Burbank also has Valley Cruise Night at the Foster's Freeze at 201 South Glen Oaks Boulevard from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Garden Grove has their weekly Friday night car show at 12891 Historic Main Street from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. North Hollywood has the Rollin' Heaps Friday Night Rollin' at 6065 Lankershim Boulevard from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Northridge has Bob's Big Boys Cruisin' at 8876 Corbin Avenue from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Riverside has the Car Cruise at the Farmer Boys, located at 16880 Van Buren Boulevard from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Yucca Valley has the Sonic Drive-In Cruise-In at 58145 Highway 62 from 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Saturday, March 7th, Brea has the Classic Car Show at the Farmer Boys at 500 West Lambert Road from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Carlsbad has Seabad Cars at 7130 Avenida Encinas from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. City of Industry has Heights Cruisers at the Panera Bread, located at 17501 Colima Road from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Claremont has Cars and Coffee at the Curtis Corner, 107 Harvard Ave, 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. Corona has Cars and Coffee Corona at the Saline headquarters at 2755 Wardlow Road from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Dana Point, Monarch Bay Plaza at Crown Valley and Pacific Coast Highway from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Gardena has the Classic Cruisers Car Show at the Farmer Boys at 641 West Redondo Beach Boulevard from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Garden Grove at the DK Donuts, 9971 Chapman Ave at Brookhurst, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. Huntington Beach has Donut Derelicts at Magnolia and Adams from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. La Cañada, the Early Rodders meets at United Artists Theater, 1919 Verdugo Boulevard, 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. Newberry Park has the Conejo Valley Cars and Coffee at 2700 Teller Road from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Two events in Palm Desert, Silver Scorpions Cars and Breakfast at 44491 Town Center Way, 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., and the Palm Spring Cruising Association meets at 72840 Highway 111 from 1 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Placentia has Donuts and Dipsticks at 2001 East Orange Thorpe Ave from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Rancho Cucamonga has the Haven City Market Car Show at 8443 Haven from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Rancho Santa Fe has Cars and Coffee at 5978 Paseo Delicias from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Riverside has Cars and Coffee that meets at the Riverside Airport Cafe at 6951 Flight Road, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. San Clemente has the weekly South OC Cars and Coffee at the outlets at San Clemente in their southwest corner from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. San Marcos is having the 5th annual Motors for Music Car Show at 1615 West San Marcos Boulevard from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Temecula has their car cruise at the Farmer Boys, located at 41700 West Winchester Road, from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Torrance has caffeine cruisers at Artesia and Hawthorne Boulevard from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Torrance also has Gas Rats Customs Brews Hall Takeover at 21770 Del Amo Circle East at 10 a.m. Valencia has Cars and Coffee at 23222 Valencia Boulevard from 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. On Sunday, March 8th, Bellflower is having the annual St. John Bosco Fundraiser Car Show at 13640 Bellflower Boulevard from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Chino Hills has the Cars and Coffee Chino Hills at the Donut Star, 4195 Chino Hills Parkway, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Huntington Beach Cars and Coffee at Pacific City, 21010 Pacific Coast Highway, from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Laguna Hills has Sunday Steel Coffee Cars Friends at Steelhead Coffee at 23382 Mill Creek Drive at 8 a.m. Lakewood has Hotcakes and Hot Rods at the Glory Days Sports Grill, 4132 Woodruff, from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Long Beach has the High Performance Swap Meet and Car Show at Veterans Stadium, 5000 Lou Davis Street, from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. Long Beach has Coffee and Cars at 5000 East Spring Street from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Malibu has Malibu Cars and Coffee, located at 24250 Pacific Coast Highway, from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. In Northridge, Classic Cars and Coffee meets at the Western Bagel, 19500 Plummer Street at 6 a.m. Pasadena, the Sunday Club at Rosebud Coffee, 2302 East Colorado Boulevard, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Riverside, BMW of Riverside Cars and Coffee Auto Show event is at 3060 Adams Street, from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Seal Beach, Hot Rods at the Beach, Glory Days Seaside Grill, 620 Pacific Coast Highway, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Villa Park has Cars and Coffee at the Coffee Grove at 17769 San Diego Boulevard, Suite C, from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Whittier has Whittier Hills Cars and Coffee at 15740 Whitwood Lane from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And wrapping it up, Woodland Hills has their Supercar Sunday at Pierce College, 6201 Winnetka Avenue, from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And that is what's happening around Southern California in the car scene during the weekend of March 6th through March 8th. Be sure to visit SoCalCarCulture.com to check out the latest information and updates on car-related events happening throughout Southern California.
Beginning with our next episode, we will present a 5-part series on Southern California's pioneering drive-thru restaurant chains. Starting in the late 1940s, as Southern Californians were spending more time in their cars than ever before, food service operators evolved to cater to the demand for quick food ready to be consumed hot and fresh. Because Southern California was so car-centric after the end of World War II, many local entrepreneurs developed specific food handling operations to serve the emerging needs of their customers. Over the next 5 episodes, we will review the beginnings of 5 iconic homegrown fast food restaurant chains that have offered drive-thru service to hungry Southern Californians for at least a half a century. Please join us as we share the stories of In-N-Out Hamburgers, Jack in the Box, Baker's, Der Wiener Schnitzel, and Nagel's. That's it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed your time with us today. You can visit us online at hamburgers&hotrods.com, where you can check out our show notes, listen to our complete show library, as well as checking out all of the various platforms where our show can be heard. Until next time, thanks for listening. We'll see you then.